Moving on, religious freedom protection liability. This is for any belief-based decisions. So if someone is alleging that you are discriminating and you are following what's in the bylaws of your denomination, Brotherhood will pay to defend the separation of church and state here. One more thing that religious freedom protection adds is coverage for their tax-exempt status being challenged. If their unrelated business income starts getting a little too high and the IRS challenges their tax-exempt 501c3 status, their policy will pay to defend them, unless it's clear that they obviously are a for-profit entity and no longer qualify as a nonprofit. Athletic liability. This can be youth group icebreakers, this can be basketball. The youth group is playing capture the flag and one of the kids is running off and shreds his knee because it was in the dark, or two of the kids collide and you have a horrific head injury. That's athletic liability. Now, Brotherhood is putting limitations for concussion liability for schools, so that's something to look out for, but athletic liability is covered here. Sexual misconduct, this is for any abuse or molestation issues with the kids. It could also be vulnerable adults. It could also be adult-to-adult type issues. Some examples we've had: the music minister and the senior pastor have an affair and the scorned wife sues. We've had that happen more times than we wish. Like I mentioned previously, I've had the pastor's son face rape charges from something that happened at a pickup basketball event on Saturday at the church. Actually, the sexual misconduct also includes $10,000 for image restoration. So we paid money for his criminal case, we paid for image restoration for the church. But if they sue the church for liability, we're also on the hook for that too. It is important to note that sexual misconduct is the #1 reason churches will get taken to court. That info came from the Church Tax and Law Report. Slip and falls was the #1 reason a church would get sued. However, sexual misconduct is the #1 reason that lawsuit actually makes it into court. This tells you that sexual misconduct issues are very damaging in reputation and very emotionally charged situations. You want proper policies and procedures in place. It's not just about having a high limit of coverage. I often tell my customers you can have a high limit of coverage, but if you have a $5 million sexual acts lawsuit, your ministry is going to suffer more than your policy is going to pay. Your policy can pay, but that can't fix the damage and reputation to your ministry. That's a good thing to remember if you're competing against a company that is including a high amount of sexual misconduct coverage in the umbrella. The number looks great, but what good is the insurance money when the ministry's in the tank anyways? That's just something you can say when competing against companies that'll put sexual misconduct in the umbrella. Brotherhood sexual misconduct form also includes negligent supervision. Let's say there's a lock-in, they didn't have enough supervisors, and two of the kids ran off and something horrible happens. The coverage would cover that. Now, do note that occurrence means one offender, so if you had one person abuse 45 different women, that's just one occurrence. So that's why sometimes I'll throw a $2 million aggregate, because let's say they had that horrible scenario. You want to have coverage just in case there was another thing happening, because it sounds like they probably didn't have good controls. I always do stress the importance of controls, but that's for another video. We've talked about volunteers. They're covered as additional insureds. Wage loss reimbursement. This is tied in with your medical payments coverage, so it's a no-fault coverage. So that same person who slips and falls, they're not suing you guys for liability. They're not saying you did anything wrong. They're just saying, I got hurt on your premises, I have these medical bills, and I couldn't go back to work for a few weeks. We're not only paying the medical bills, but we're paying some of his lost wages under this wage loss reimbursement. Security operations. This provides personal liability for anybody serving on the security team. It also removes the intentional acts exclusion, which is a standard exclusion on pretty much every policy, which says that if you intend to do someone harm, it's not covered by the policy. So your homeowner's policy has an intentional acts exclusion, where if you go to a Little League game and you get angry at one of the fellow parents and you punch him in the face, it's not covered because you intended to do them harm. However, if you're serving on a security team, there might be a situation where you are reacting to a situation and you're not necessarily 100% positive what you're doing, but you are trying to help the overall safety of the church. And let's say someone's fumbling in their pocket, it looks like they might have a gun, you take them down, turns out it was a cell phone, and now you've separated their shoulder, and they're suing the individual and they're suing the church. Well, the security operations would provide coverage for the individual and the church. It also increases the medical payments coverage by $50,000 for the security team members, and it increases wage loss by $10,000. Traumatic incident response is actually similar to it. This covers the congregation for that violent event. So it increases that same medical payments by $50,000. It increases the wage loss by $10,000. It pays for a media consultant. It'll pay for an armed security team in the following weeks if they want that. We've had several situations where this was used. We had trees fall onto a bunch of campers and there was a fatality. So we paid for the media consultant. We had a camper medical policy in that situation that paid there. I've also had this pay on a church where the pastor's wife committed suicide in the church office. The church staff members walked in on it and they were traumatized since they witnessed the event. We paid for some counseling for those people. This next one, worldwide liability, I explained this as it extends your liability coverage into foreign court. If something gets brought into a court in Ecuador, we'll actually pay to defend you in Ecuador. It also extends your medical payments coverage worldwide. They should be buying Faith Ventures for foreign missions. Absolutely sell them on Faith Ventures. I often say to people, I don't really care where you buy your travel accident policy. I just care that you have one. If someone gets hurt in backwoods China, nobody knows how to take care of that. One of the biggest things you buy here is a number to call if something goes wrong. But worldwide liability is coverage for the organization, extends your medical payments coverage. It also gives you $25,000 in kidnap and ransom. But I advise them not to broadcast that because if people know there's kidnap and ransom coverage, you're more likely to be a target. Moving on, I'll quickly cover work comp here. There's employer's liability, and then there's a part of work comp that everyone thinks of. So Part A and Part B. Employer's liability, you've got limits here. The umbrella goes over it. This is for someone suing for above and beyond your standard work comp benefits. Your standard work comp benefits are regulated by whatever state you're in, and there is no cap. Usually it's 2/3 your lost wages, all your medical bills, other things. So whatever your state mandates, that's what they get. If they sue for above that, that's this employer's liability. Remuneration means payroll. The payroll impacts the cost of the work comp policy because it's payroll times the filed rate. Here's the umbrella. We got a $5 million umbrella. You can see I included $1 million of directors and officers coverage. It's good to remember that directors and officers, employment practices, employee benefits, cyber liability, sexual misconduct, all of those are not covered by the umbrella unless you get them bought back in. There's usually more requirements you have to go through to get them brought into the umbrella, but that's how you do it. Then I get to this. I mentioned that these are the optional coverages they can consider. Car care ministry was big in the 90s. Promise Keepers promoted it. It was changing the oil in the parking lot or working on less fortunate members' cars, like working on their brakes and stuff. This is called garage keepers liability in the insurance world. Most churches don't do this, but if they do change the oil in the parking lot, you'll want to talk about car care ministry, because if they're working on a car, then they screw up, it goes out on the road, they cause the accident, it's coming back on this car care ministry or garage keepers liability, and that can be expensive. Faith Ventures is for foreign missions. I briefly mentioned that earlier. Professional nurses liabilities for a parish nurse ministry or for a school nurse. If you have designated a nurse to respond or any medical professional, since they are a professional, there's a higher expectation of service, and we just need to designate that we're going to cover the professional liability for the nurses as well. The church is already covered on the policy. This professional nurse's liability will cover the nurse for their medical malpractice. Similar for that for physicians. Ministry works as a payroll service. I usually get great feedback on anybody who switched to it, and we can quote a flood policy through the National Flood Insurance Plan. Guys, that's everything for the liability coverages. If you've got questions, feel free to reach out, and I hope you enjoyed it.